iniciar a nossa programação. So thank you. I would like to ask everybody to please have a seat so that we can go ahead and get started with this afternoon's session with Mark Church. Então, para começar, eu gostaria que o Márcio e a Luciana levantassem as mãos para que vocês consigam identificar as duas pessoas que vão estar fazendo uma tradução para quem precise. Então, a gente pede que quem precise de tradução, a apresentação vai ser toda em inglês, que você, por favor, sente perto do Márcio e da Luciana. O Márcio está na minha esquerda, a Luciana está na minha direita, e eles vão estar trabalhando com grupos pequenos e fazendo essa tradução ao longo do processo. A gente também pede que todo mundo tenha uma pasta em suas mãos. A gente estava entregando a pasta, a Isabelle, que está atrás, ela vai se identificar. Isabelle, se você puder levantar a mão, ela tem uma pasta, e essa pasta tem a tradução do script de um vídeo que vai ser passado hoje, e essa pasta também tem umas informações para os pais, para que vocês possam acessar informações adicionais sobre Cultures of Thinking, para que você possa acessar essas informações de casa. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And it's with great pleasure and with great honor that we would like to welcome our dear friend and colleague and inspirational mentor, who has really supported the Concept School in leading the journey of developing a culture of thinking. And it's so fascinating when we talk about cultures of thinking in terms of what we mean when we speak about building these cultures and developing these cultures. What does that stand for? What does that represent, right? It seems so obvious that schools should all be cultures of thinking, but are they really? And are all schools cultures of thinking that are worth thinking about, right? So I think these are questions that we will continuously ask ourselves. So what we're doing at Concept is truly building a culture of thinking, truly focusing on teaching for understanding. And in order to do that, it's not easy. And it really does take a village to get that done. And as we're growing and developing and learning, we have invited Mark to support us. And Mark Church, he has been involved with Harvard's Project Zero, and that's where all this conversation about cultures of thinking has happened. And he has been our inspiration and our mentor throughout this journey. So Mark joined us back in February when we were just starting. When we were beginning our PD, when we were doing our professional development, we were honored to have him spend some time and some days here with us. And then he came back now, 3 months later, to help us continue our journey, to guide us through other processes, to study thinking with us, to lead learning labs. So our teachers participated in learning labs this whole week. And tomorrow they're going to continue their participation. And on Saturday, we're going to continue our conversation with them. So there's lots of exciting things happening. And Mark will be able to frame all of this to all of you today. And hopefully, by the end of the day today, you will leave with a clear understanding of what it means to build and develop this culture of thinking. So I would like to welcome Mark and thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. And this is our first June session for our parent educational learning community. So we won't have famous guests every month to lead our educational learning community, but it just so happened that we had Marian last week and Mark Church this week. So you guys are in for a treat. Thank you so much and enjoy the show.
Enjoy the show.
Right? There's a show.
There's a show. What show? Good afternoon. Wow. That did not sound convincing. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I hope it has been a good day for you. I know, well, for the teachers who are here, I know that you've been putting in long hours, of course, all this week working with the students, and then for parents, of course, you've got your life outside of your home, and then now you've got to go home and do your home lives as well. So I'm really glad to be here with you today. There's not a show. However, I am very glad to continue the conversation around, creating the culture of thinking. Really, this idea of, what's the story of learning in this place? As a new school, a new campus, and then we know we have the partner campuses in other places here in Brazil, Salvador, and Quibdó. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, but our partner schools. These are new schools, a new undertaking. I know there's a real vision for creating a real rich place of learning for children that come to these campuses. And it's my delight to be with you to just further the conversation. What is the story of learning in our classrooms and our schools? The other thing I also want to say before I just get into the conversation is, I think there's something to be said for a school. I mean, the parents who are here, you have many choices of where you can send your children, and you have many decisions to make around that. But for you to pick a school that really thinks deeply about the learning of the children and the learning of the teachers, I think that's a pretty good thing. Because we know that the quality of learning for the children cannot exceed the quality of those that lead that learning. So whenever I'm looking for a school, it's like, what's the learning like for children, and what's the learning like for those that lead the children? So there's a constant investment towards creating a rich space where new ideas can develop and grow. So having said that, Priscilla made mention of me already. My name is Mark Church, and I work with, there's colleagues and researchers that work at Harvard University Project Zero, and there's people like myself that work with them. Project Zero is a research group at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and there's lots of projects that go on at Project Zero. Our particular projects are around making thinking visible, creating a culture of thinking. So that's the topic that we're on today. So before I just even launch into that topic, maybe you could just turn and talk to that one person next to you. Think about the children that you teach, or the children you've been raising. When has there been a moment in your life with your children where you were really pleased or surprised by your children and their thinking? When was there a moment, and everybody, a parent, you've had that experience, adults that work with children, you've had that experience. Where was there a moment with your child or with the children you teach where you were sort of blown away? You were really pleased, you were surprised by what kind of thinking that child just brought to the table. I'll be quiet for a moment. Why don't you turn and talk with one person? When was that moment where you were pleased, surprised, blown away?
Aí eu não sei, eu vi uma foto da Leslie, você dava por aí. Aí eu
So let me jump back in with you if I could. Could I hear from someone? When was there a moment where you were really surprised, you were pleased with the thinking that your child brought to you? I heard you all just talking. Yeah, talk. Speak real loud, please. Yeah. It's a little hard here in the room, I know, but go ahead, speak loud.
Eu fico falando que todo mundo precisa de comer para sobreviver. Por que a gente tem que pagar para sobreviver?
Okay, so there was a question of survival. You were surprised by the question your child asked. What about someone else? When was there a moment where you were really just surprised or pleased with your child? Yeah, please.
So just simply get to meet a lot more God or himself.
Oh, love God more or themselves more? And what surprised you about that? What was interesting for you?
Just how come we're not real church style family,
Oh, there you go. But there was something about that question that.
Previously they went to Catholic school.
Yeah.
And I don't know how come they can think about this,
Has anyone else had that experience where you were just really surprised by a question that a child asked? Anybody else have that experience? How about someone else? What's pleased you most in your children? Yeah, please.
I'm surprised from slavery.
And what surprised you about that?
I was driving 100 years ago. Now, it's not fair because now we feel our state.
Yeah, the consequences. We can still have these consequences. Yeah. But the context is there. So some of the examples that you're bringing up here, children are curious about things. Children have questions. Children think deeply about big ideas. We see that from a very young age. But then sometimes we have to wonder in our schools, where does school help keep that alive and grow that? And when does school become a place that maybe hides that? Right? There are many times where I'm working with high school teachers. We don't have high school teachers here right now. But I've heard teachers who teach the 17-year-olds, the 18-year-olds, they'll say, oh, well, those kids don't know how to think. They don't know how to think. Well, they did at one point. When they were 3 years old, they were asking questions about slavery or questions about love or questions about this topic or that topic. So the question is, if kids are curious, if kids have thoughts, if kids have ways of perceiving things early on, then what would it mean for us in school to welcome that, to encourage that, to create a culture that invites that? rather than, no, it's not time for you to question. Here, let me tell you what you need to know. And I really think that's the undertaking of concept school, from what I understand, is how do we cast children in a different kind of way that honors the thinking that they bring and scaffolds that and pushes it forward? How do we not become a culture of just get through the stuff, get through the work, but a real culture where those questions drive the learning. And those questions lead to more questions and perspectives and complexities and perspectives and so on and so forth. With that in mind, I want to share with you, as a group of educational researchers and people like myself who work with them, we don't have a curriculum. We're not curriculum developers. We are not program developers. It's not like we have a package that we scale up and then sell to people. That's not our function. We don't have a curriculum to implement. What we have is a set of questions as well. There are things we're curious about. And therefore, we get our heads and our hands and our hearts in that space and try to get into that curious space of the questions we're curious about. And the schools we partner with, we do so because the questions we're asking and the questions they're asking share some connection. So I thought for the parents and then for a repeat for the teachers, or a reconnect with the teachers, I'd like to share with you the kinds of questions we're curious about so you get a sense of what our project is about. You get a sense of the landscape. So one question we're curious about in our project is a question about messages. What messages do we send students about what learning is? What messages are we sending students about what learning is and how it happens? Schools are really good about sending messages about what we want students to learn. We want you to learn about slavery. We want you to learn about Shakespeare. We want you to learn about poetry, mathematics. But what do students learn about what learning is while they're in school? That's what we're curious about. So that's not just the stuff of school, but the processes. I've been seeing a lot of the children in passing, but I've been working mainly with the teachers. But I can imagine having a conversation with the children. So guys, do you like going to school here? The children would say, oh yes, of course we like going to school here. Well, tell me about the teachers of this school. Do you think the teachers want you to learn here? The kids are, of course the teachers want us to learn. The next question I would love to ask is, okay, when the teachers of this school say they want you to learn, what do they want you to do? What comes off their tongues next is the thing we're very curious about. Oh, when the teachers say they want us to learn, what they really mean is this. They want us to do this. When Mr. So-and-so says he wants us to learn, he means this. But when Miss So-and-so says she wants us to learn, what she means is this. What is the this? That's what we're curious about. And why? That's the student's conception of what learning is. So as a teacher, I go into my students and I say, oh my gosh, we're going to have our break in July. We have a lot of learning to do. We have so much learning to do. And I have one idea of what that means. But if every other person in the room has another idea of what that means, there could be a disconnect, a problem. I think learning happens this way, but if they think learning happens another way, there could be a real problem. And as a teacher, how would I ever know? So this is why in our project we're curious not just what are kids learning while they're with us, but what do kids learn about learning while they're with us? There's a second question we're curious about. If we're very happy with what the students would say, or whether we're a little bit shocked or alarmed by what the students would say. There's a tag-along question, not just what messages do they have about what learning is, but the question is, where did they get the message? Where did students come to understand what learning is? And this is why we start to make an argument that a lot of the message comes through the culture. So a second question we're curious about in our project is, how do we take more notice of the culture of our classrooms? And how does the culture communicate to the students, this is what learning is? Culture. I've been sharing this with some of the others this week, but I'll share it with everybody. Raise your hand in this room. Has anybody ever lived in a place or traveled to a place that's different than where you grew up? Who's lived in another place before, traveled to another place? Like everybody? Yeah, of course. Well, think about that experience for a moment. You aren't in that new place very long, whether it was another place in Brazil, whether it's another place in South America, like you went to Santiago or something. Maybe you lived in London. Wherever you traveled, wherever you lived, you weren't there very long and you got a sense, oh, this matters here. This is important here. These people love this here. These people are crazy about this here, right? You don't have to be in a new place very long and you get a sense, this is important here. And it could be very similar to back home where I grew up in Brazil, or it can be very different. But that's the power of culture. Culture sends message. Everybody in a culture knows this is what's important here. So why are we talking about this in schools? Well, in schools, we get the right curriculum in place and get the right materials in place and get the right lessons in place, but it still sits within a culture that every one of these teachers wraps around it. So that's why two teachers, we could be teaching the same lessons, we could be doing the same project, but the kids could come out with very different learning outcomes. This teacher could be saying, oh, to be a good learner, you have to look for connections, you have to look closely. And in this culture, the teacher could, oh, to be a good learner, you have to match my answer in my head. You see the difference there? Both teachers are doing the same lesson, but the students are getting very different messages. So that's why the concept teachers that I know right now, they're thinking a lot. What messages do we want to send to the kids about what learning is? How do we shape the culture so that we send messages to the kids that their questions, their puzzles, their inquiry matters? And then there's this third question in our project is, how do we make students' thinking more visible? What value does it have? How do I take the thinking that's going on inside my students' heads and do something with it? As the parents were just sharing, you're sending us children that are already full of lots of ideas and lots of questions and lots of concepts, right? You're not sending us empty children for us to fill. They already have a lot of thinking inside their heads, even the very young ones. And so that's why the question for us on the teacher side is, how do we take what's inside their heads and get it out? And by making their thinking visible, how does that help us together, collaboratively, shape the learning? Make our questions go deeper, get our perspectives more sophisticated, and so on and so forth. So these are the three questions in our project. What messages are we sending? How does the culture help to shape that? How do we make thinking visible? You must have some reaction around this. So let me be quiet so you have a chance to process. Why don't you talk with that person next to you? What reaction do you have? What makes sense? What's interesting for you? Just have a little turn and talk with your neighbor so I can be quiet and you can get your voice here. Please.
Eu vejo que as crianças, eu vi na palestra da Magda, ela mostrou o leque da alteração do mundo. E realmente eu acho que fez aquilo nunca mais vai fazer funcionamento. Eu fui para Ribeirão, na escola. E eu vejo que com babado, Porque a gente viaja laboratórios, as coisas mais caras. Eu acho que vai ter história.
So friends, let's come back together here. What I want to share with you here, the questions we're asking here, I just want to share with those, for the teachers, for your benefit. You know, I shared these questions with you already some months ago, and then we learned some techniques and some practices towards that. It's easy for us to get lost in the techniques and forget our purpose is here, right? So for the teacher's benefit, you know, it's not about just doing the thinking routines. It's about what messages are we sending students about what learning is? And how does the culture help to shape that message? What routines will help that, or what language do I use with that? For the parents, I'd love you to get the idea that, you know, this teaching job, it's really hard. Because it's what I appreciate about what this school is doing is, unlike other schools that could be out there, here's the curriculum delivered lessons. So students' thinking doesn't maybe even matter so much because it's what the teacher is thinking and the children's thinking is just to absorb. But what I understand about the concept philosophy across the campuses is, how do we create a space for children? What kind of culture will send messages to the students that their thinking matters? Because these children are 5 years old now, 6 years old now, but someday they will be 15 and 16. And someday they will be 50 and 60. And what kind of thinkers do we want them to be there when they're our age? Right? So I think that's maybe why the concept school organization is interacting with these ideas. It's not just coming up with more fancy lessons to deliver, but it's about creating a space for children to grow into thinkers and learners that will help them when they're 5 and 15 and when they're 50. Because someday that 3-year-old, that 6-year-old will be 50. And we have big dreams for them. So having said that, I just thought being on the stage was too far. I don't want to be up there anymore, so I'm here. Just like an American, just come in and move in. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I want to just talk about this idea of a culture of thinking. That language could be very unfamiliar. A culture of thinking. I've never heard of that before. That may be true. Maybe you never heard of a culture of thinking. But I suppose you have had the experience. So I'd like to draw on your own experience first. I'm going to have you do a little thought experience in your mind before you talk to your partner again. But I need a favor. For purposes of this next part of the discussion, you are not allowed to be a teacher, and you're not allowed to be a parent. You just have to be human, just person, okay? Can you take off your parent hat, take off your teacher hat, just be person? Okay. So, I know, it's hard, go crazy. It's crazy. It's only Thursday. Okay, so I would like you to think of a time, when and where have you been part of a group that did good thinking together? When and where have you been part of a group that did good thinking together, and that thinking really influenced your learning? Maybe it's a social group you're a part of. Maybe it's a book club. Maybe it's an arts group. Maybe it's a service group or a church group or something. A university group. Think of a time when you've been part of a group that did really good thinking together. When you have your example, start to play the movie in your mind. What made it that way? Out of all the groups you were a part of, what was it about that group that caused you to do good thinking together? What were the factors or the influences, the practices? Like, what made that group such a good thinking group that mattered to your learning? Would you like to write a note down or two? Write a note down or two. Or tap on your phone. Write down one idea, two ideas. So when you have your example in mind, you've been sitting for a while. Why don't you have a standing conversation? If you want to stand, you can stretch. If you want to sit, you can sit. That's fine. But talk with the one person next to you or the person behind you. What group were you part of that did good thinking together? Just tell them the group. But get into the second question. What made it that way? Why was that such a good thinking group that mattered to your learning? So I don't want just a fun group, I don't want just a nice group, but a group where your thinking pushed your learning. Could you turn and talk with your neighbor there for a moment? What were the factors? What made it that way?
Well, I guess. Oh, is that done?
So let me come back with you. My hope is you've been part of the culture of thinking before. That's my hope. I think if you've made it this far in life and you've never had any group that ever mattered to your learning, I would feel sad about that. But I wonder if people have had the opposite experience. When and where have you been part of a group that didn't do good thinking together? I think most of us have had that experience too, where you've been part of a group and we didn't do good thinking together. And certainly I've been in meetings where I drive home afterwards and I think, wow, for so many smart people at the table, why do we act so dumb? And people have that experience too. But let's go on to the other side of that. Groups that did good thinking together, it mattered to your learning. Can we hear from a few voices? What made it that way? Why was that such a good thinking group for you? Let's hear some of the features there. There was a chance for us to collaborate. Someone, please, I need to hear.
He created connection. He had connection. We were open to connect and change.
Okay, so there was a lot of opportunity for us to make connections and grow and change from that. Someone else, what made your group such a good thinking group?
Respect, freedom,
Respect and
freedom, not afraid of speaking up.
okay, not afraid of speaking up like now. But respect. Now let me ask you this, if I may. I've been in lots of groups where people respected each other, but maybe our thinking wasn't so good. But you're talking about respect, how? What did the respect do?
If the ego own person or the level person in the company or in the group per se. Anything.
Okay, so the respect allowed lots of voices to come together,
Pretty awesome.
and so that we could speak freely with each other. How about somebody else? What was your experience? What made it that way?
I was thinking about my yoga group
Yeah.
and how, although you don't talk much to each other, there's a feeling that we're all connected, but each one on their own rhythm and with their own, someone better than something, someone is happy, and at our own pace, but still together.
Okay, so there was a chance for us to individually at our own pace, but
Yeah.
together we were going somewhere.
We're all experiencing our development.
Okay, so a common development, a common goal maybe, but individual places for us, individually and collectively, it sounds. How about something else? One of the teachers?
Sharing deep personal experiences.
That we had a chance that we could really connect on sharing deep personal experiences. What do you think that did for the learning?
More insightful, and it also was more meaningful since everybody was really giving, their inner thoughts.
Okay, when we connected with that way, we push each other and get more of our experiences on the table. You know, I asked this question in many groups, when and where have you been part of the culture of thinking? Maybe you didn't call it that, but you experienced it. Something about that group sets itself apart from other groups. When I ask other people the same question, much like you're just sharing here, I start to hear these things. We could be flexible, our collective thinking was valued, or everybody brought strengths, or we could learn from our mistakes. We felt safe, maybe respect allowed for safety, we could speak freely, open-minded, we had a common goal. All voices could get heard. When people talk about groups that really had an influence on their learning, oftentimes these qualities are there. So this presents an interesting question, especially for educators. Or I'll say it this way. Maybe some years from now, I'm having this conversation. When and where have you been part of a group that did good thinking together and it mattered to your learning? And the respondents like you, they happen to be children who graduated from concept school. And they say, back in Mr. So-and-so's music class at concept school. Oh, really? Why? Oh, well, we had a lot of music to learn and there was a lot of projects to do, but he was always good about getting all the voices out. Back in Miss So-and-so's class at concept school, that was a place that did good thinking for me. Why? Oh, well, we had a lot of busy stuff to do that fifth grade students do, but every time we made mistakes, it turned into opportunities. That could be the feather in our cap. Is years from now, if students look back in our class, not just what did they learn, but our classroom culture felt like that, if you will. And this is the thing, and I'll give the secret to the teachers. You know, when a country has a curriculum or a state has a curriculum, you give the curriculum to someone, and these are the lessons to be taught. But the curriculum never tells us about this. This is what we have to shape. This is what we have to think. What kind of goal do we want to have? How am I going to get the individual students in there at their own pace, but together, much like your yoga experience? This is a challenging undertaking, but that's what I'm understanding the teachers of concept school are trying to do. Defining a culture of thinking, we define it this way, that a culture of thinking are places where a group's collective as well as individual thinking is visible, it's valued, and it's actively promoted. Active part of the regular day-to-day experience. Consider the yoga group or the book club or the university group or at your work project. Whatever the experience was, I suppose those three qualities that were there. When I was part of a group that did good thinking, there was a chance for me individually to make my thinking visible and collectively to make the thinking visible. There was value to it. It had a lot of value to it. It helped shape where the group went. When those qualities are there, that's when you have a culture of thinking. Right now, I know the teachers of this school are getting really good about making students' thinking visible. I think the next bump up is, okay, and then what value does that have? And how will we use the thinking, the questions that your children are giving us, and how do we shape that to really create a culture of thinking? That's the undertaking here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to step inside the classroom. Some of you have seen this classroom before. Others of you, it will be the first time. As we step inside this, just so we can operationalize it a little bit, we're going to step inside this teacher's classroom. As you step inside, this teacher really wants to create a culture of thinking. So you're asking, what kind of thinking is she making visible? What kind of thinking is valuable here? What is the teacher doing to shape the learning of the group? So as you step in this classroom, what strikes you? What do you see? What do you notice? And then what elements from your experiences being part of the culture of thinking do you see in action? You were talking about a yoga group. This is not a yoga group. This is a grade 5 classroom. But still, where do you see the element of individual and collective? Where do you see elements from your list in action here? Where do you see thinking being made visible, valued, actively promoted? This teacher's going to be making use of the thinking routine, which several of you know. When we saw the thinking routine in February, you were looking at the thinking routine. Now you can look at the bigger picture. I'm saying that for the teacher's benefit. Look beyond the routine. Where is it shaping the culture? That's the invite for everyone. I know my speaking English right now is already, you're having to process that. That's one thing. Watching a video, it's a little fast sometimes. So there is a transcript there in Portuguese for you to follow along if that's helpful. So that part, it's there. So do as you like. Let me go get the video on. I'm still here. I'm back here. Hello, everybody. Identity. Okay, let's have a look. What strikes you? What do you notice? How is this a culture of thinking?
Okay, well, the children are studying human rights at the moment, and the reason that I wanted to use the routine of I see and I wonder is because I wanted to give the children an opportunity to look at situations where children didn't have their rights. The beauty of this routine is that it forces the children to slow down and to really look at the pictures, see, and to focus on what is it that they really see. And then they can wonder about what that might mean. It stops them from drawing conclusions too quickly.
Yesterday we looked at the conventions of the right as a child, and today we're going to carry on looking at that. The way that I want to do it is I want to give you some photographs to look at, and I want you to use a routine. I want you to use the routine we've used before. I see and I wonder. Okay. I've got a picture here, and it's not one that actually anybody's going to use. It's just one that I chose to show you now. Okay. So if we were to say, what do you see? What are the kinds of things that you might say about this? Alex?
Children saluting.
Children, you can see that they've got their hands up and they're saluting. Very good. Kyojun.
I see a blackboard.
Okay, you see a blackboard. Is there any writing on the blackboard?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some writing on the blackboard. Yeah?
Flag.
A flag.
I
Yeah.
see a girl dressed like a maid.
Okay, but what do you notice? You say dressed like a maid, but what is it about the girls' dresses that you notice?
They're old.
They're old.
They're old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned, okay. And what is it about them that makes you say that they're old-fashioned?
Because we don't wear like those dresses nowadays.
Okay.
We wear like these kind of modern clothes.
What do you think might be going on with those children?
The saluting.
They seem to be saluting. So that's another one of I see, isn't it? I see them saluting. So I see a group of children. I see them saluting.
Maybe they're in an assembly or something.
Jean?
I wonder if they're singing their national anthem.
Okay, now why would you say
They're looking at the flag and then they're going like this.
okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do this part, and then when we all think that we've finished with this part, we're going to come together as a whole class again, and we're going to discuss what we found out about the different rights. It's going to be for Drew and Severin and June. Right.
How can you tell this? I think that I doubt that when you see the blue I wonder where they're from. Maybe it's in the wood. Yeah.
I think it might be on the second page. And what is it that's making you say that?
This is German.
Okay, this is written in German, is it?
They're not allowed. No.
Okay.
Because they never against the Jews.
Is this, what is this sign here? That's the Star of David. And what do you think is being said here in this picture here?
It's not like he paid a lot. It's like he lives like because he didn't
Okay, so you're saying over here, what do you think's going on? I think the kids are being forced to work. What makes you think they might be being forced rather than actually having agreed to?
I mean, he probably wanted to do it, but I mean, I don't think that kid would really want to be making I don't think that's the nicest job. Yeah. He probably have another job.
Rather go to school? Now, the next one's really interesting. You said, I wonder if they are orphans. What made you say that?
It looks like they don't have a home. Also him. Kind of looks like he lives down there. I don't really know. But we just thought some of them looked a bit like they didn't have a place to go to live. And then like these ones, the 3, 5, they looked like they had somewhere to go. But these 3 people, they looked a bit.
And what do you think you were basing the finding on? When you were looking at them, what is it that you can see about them that maybe thinks they had a home to go to?
They had homes.
Yeah. All right. so. Okay, well done. So let's have a look at this. You've talked about the background that you've seen, the rubbish everywhere, child asking for something, the one lady on her own with her baby, wearing dirty clothes. And over here you said, I wonder if they are poor. I wonder if there was war, if there's been a war. I wonder if that's why the walls have got broken. I wonder if he's a beggar because he has a small bucket. I wonder if that's her job, but she doesn't get much money. This is the little girl cleaning the rubbish. I wonder if it's because they don't have any food, but their tummies are swollen, or the children are crying.
No, in America they got too much. Yeah, and McDonald's, Burger King, pizza.
Okay, you've done a really good job of looking at those pictures. I can see you've really tried to find an explanation for what's going on. And I really like the way that you use what you already know, things that you've already seen maybe on television or news reports. What we're going to do is you're going to come with your table and your photograph and come and sit up at the board, and we're going to see what conclusions we can draw about the pictures, and then you get a chance to look at each other's pictures as well. Children and Alex, can you tell us, quite simply, what was the big idea that you got from looking at these pictures? What were the things you were noticing and thinking might be going on?
Quite lots of slavery.
But I'm going to pull you back a little bit, Alex, and ask you, what was it that you were seeing in all of the pictures then? What were you seeing before you got to the idea of slavery? What was it you were actually seeing?
Children were working.
Yeah.
We wondered if they were forced to.
Okay, yeah. Because, and why were some of the reasons that you thought that maybe they were being forced to work?
Because, like, some of the jobs that the people had were like, one of the ones at the very top in the middle, there are two children, and they have bags on their back, and we thought they were maybe carrying garbage, and they were being forced to do that, so their faces were all shaped.
They're concentrated.
They were carrying the bricks.
Carrying the bricks. Good.
I'm sure that they also don't want to work, and they would much rather go to school. So I wonder if they're being driven by the extreme poverty.
Yeah.
And maybe the parents are making them work.
Okay, great. Now look, everybody, you've all done a really good job on each of your different pictures, and we'll share the others. And the idea of this is that then we'll be able to look at the connections between these different photographs and what's going on in different children's lives, and be able to draw a big conclusion about the rights of the child.
I've used this routine several times during the year already, but what I was delighted to see was that it was becoming easier for them to do it. They were not getting distracted and forming conclusions too quickly. They were really looking carefully. And I think that the routine, although it's getting at thinking, is also a social skill. It often is developing that social interaction, that ability to listen to each other and to think about what somebody else is saying. And so the thinking that happens in the classroom becomes more exciting because they're starting to build explanations and pictures, and they help each other to understand the situation better.
So I will change the slide back. Have a chance to talk with the person next to you. What did you see? What struck you? What did you notice? You've all been part of cultures and thinking before. What elements from your experiences did you see in action here? You were talking about a very different experience, but maybe you saw some themes. How was this teacher making students thinking visible, valued, actively promoted? You must have some reaction. So you talk about these slides back on.
É verdade.
Viu? Um fala que tem, né, fala que passa fome, o outro fala, eu acho que não, você está fazendo ali no trabalho, porque a mãe está voltando. Cada um vem de uma interpretação, vem de uma cultura. Então, não sei, eu acho que legal é uma casa, pode ir de uma maneira, a gente não pensar eu acho que segura na barra, a gente eu achava justo.
So friends, can I come join with you? So what kinds of things came up for people? What was something that struck you? What did you notice? Yeah, please. That's all right.
So that the teacher never say that it's right or it's wrong. You just listen what they have to say, and then to lead them to write your conclusion together, and not to say, okay, this is right, this is wrong. Then the children have no fear to tell what they think about. And here, I think in Brazil, we have this fear of mistake very strong. Our children are shown to say that they're fear to make mistake. They fear to make mistake. And this is really nice to see that the children there just let hold that what they think.
Yeah. Yeah, so let me repeat back a little, because I know we're competing with the outside noise, and it's a very large room. But you were saying one thing you noticed is the teacher didn't jump in with the right or wrong, but she really listened to what they had to say. But she kept saying back, okay, so you think they might be slaves. What did you see that makes you say that? You know, so she did press in with that. So she wasn't just, you know, anything goes. But she was really, what did you see that makes you say that? Oh, you think they might be orphans. What did you see that makes you say that? That's a different kind of interaction than yes, that's right, no, that's not. And you were saying that maybe that creates a culture where students feel like they can put their thinking out rather than being afraid of making a mistake. And that's not just a Brazilian thing. I think that happens in other countries too. But it's a challenge for teachers. And I can imagine your children coming to this school, these first few weeks, what are these teachers doing with us? This seems weird. But yet see where it can go. How about someone else? What's coming up for you? What struck you? What did you notice in this viewing of the video? Yeah, please.
Yeah, what we were talking here, that these teachers make the students have more empathy with every kind of subject, and they put themselves in places and not take everything for granted, and they are exposed to so many information today. They watch like the news, and they won't pay attention, and we make them pay attention and really see what is this like here doing, why, and talk about other cultures and other problems. So they really get into the subject themselves.
So there was a chance for them to deeply, personally connect. Our friend over there, she was sitting there, she said in her culture of thinking, when she was writing, we were able to really connect deeply with personal stories of one another, and it caused us to learn more. In some ways, that teacher was causing them to step inside, to look closely at other stories, so that empathy, compassion, also complexity. This is hard. Something else that struck you. What did you notice in that video? Yeah, please, Alexa.
I really enjoyed to see the dynamics. So she really was intentional in how she could access their individuality. So we could see that she talked to them as a big group, in small groups, that they had the opportunity to register, to write their thoughts. So we know that children will express themselves in different ways. So I really saw that she gave this opportunity for different children to express what they were seeing and their opinions and their perspectives in different ways.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, just like we had experiences being part of a culture of thinking, those groups you were thinking that you participated, everybody had a voice. There was a lot of ways for us to share. We could build on each other's ideas. Well, you saw in that classroom, that teacher, it wasn't just a lesson she was doing, she was a culture where every voice could be heard, different people could come in at different places, they could build on each other's ideas. That interaction mattered, if I heard you right. Something else that struck you?
I think after that, then you realize that the children really engage in the process, each one on their way, but they genuinely keep saying
Genuinely, yeah.
Think.
Yeah. So each one has their ideas, but together, collective. Maybe like that yoga class you were thinking about, but so a lot of space in there. One thing that I'll draw your attention to, I'll just bring, you could see the lesson, but what kind of thinking is this teacher dreaming of for her students? You weren't in her classroom very long and you got a sense, there's a certain message of learning being sent, that learning is not just absorbing. Learning isn't just memorizing, but learning involves looking closely and things like, well, this could be her list. We don't have her list here, but if we did, this lady wants to send the message that learning is about being curious and wondering. Learning is about observing closely, looking closely. She wants to send a message that learning is about building theories and explanations and reasoning with evidence. Those are good thinking habits for those young children. That's a good list for us as adults. If we would bring that to our daily lives and our parenting and our teaching and our careers and community participation. Where I want to go with this, and we're going to start to wrap up our conversations today. A teacher has to have her dream in front of her. I dream that kids would bring curiosity. He dreams that the kids will bring deep questioning to the learning. A teacher can have his wish list, her wish list, But the question is, how will the children know the secret? How will the kids know this is my dream for you? This is another part of this culture project that we're talking about. How does a classroom story get told? How will the learners in that classroom know this is what we dream of for you? You weren't in the classroom very long and you got a sense, oh, this culture, this matters, right? Just like you go to any culture, you get a sense this matters here. So what were you looking at? There were certain forces that you were looking at that were giving shape to that classroom's culture. It wasn't just the lesson, it was the culture. For example, many of you were noticing that there were routines in place to invite looking closely, building theories, wondering. There was a routine in place, a structure in place that said to the children, I want this for you. We want this for you. But it wasn't just the routine, see, think, wonder. There was also a lot of time for them to do that. There was time for them to be curious. There was time for them to look closely. There was time for them to develop theories. If the teacher has a dream, I want you to look closely. Sorry, there's no time for you to look closely. Do you see where there's a mismatch? And then children become afraid. Does she want me to do that or she doesn't want me to do that? That's why the culture piece is really important. The routines we use matter, the time we spend and invest, maybe that's the better verb, the time we invest sends messages, this is what we dream you'll grow into. Beyond routines and structures and time, there were opportunities. Opportunities for them to think about a big concept, opportunities for them to be empathetic, opportunities for them to listen to one another, opportunities for them to look closely. The opportunities that we put in front of children send messages, this is what's important. My friend over here said she noticed the teacher didn't say right or wrong. I want to come back around to that. What was the right answer? What was the wrong answer? The reason why there wasn't right or wrong there is because of the opportunity. For example, if she said to the children, go back to your desk and guess which right of the child you have. Oh, you think you have child's right number 4? No, that's wrong. You had child rights number 6. See? Oh, you thought you had the rights of the child number 1? Yes, that's right. That's the one. If she sent them back to guess which right they had, then it's yes, you got it right. No, you didn't. But she said, what do you see? What do you think could be going on here? So when a child says, I see their dirty faces. No, you don't see their dirty faces. Do you hear? That doesn't make sense. Oh, you think they might be orphans? No, you don't think they might be orphans. No, there's no right or wrong with that. That's why the teacher, it's a different opportunity. It wasn't, yes, they're orphans. No, they're not. It's, oh, what did you see that makes you think they could be orphans? That's the looking closely opportunity with that theory. You see, opportunities are very, very subtle. And that's the difference between the right or wrong. We're not saying there aren't right or wrong answers. There are right and wrong answers. Right? But in this case, it was a different kind of opportunity. So what do you see? What do you wonder? No, that's not what you wonder. It doesn't make sense there. And that's why it's sending messages, and then those kids are not afraid because they do this as a routine. Beyond the routines, the time opportunities, you notice the interactions. Alexa, a lot of your comments were around the interactions that the teacher could have. The teacher could listen in her own classroom. There was modeling going on. The teacher was modeling a kind of thinking. There's see, think, wonder, the routine, but also see, think, wonder is a model. Sometimes when a new set of information comes your way, you can say, what do I see? What do I think's going on here? What question does this raise? It's not just an activity, it's a model. Hey, a year before last in November, on a Wednesday, I woke up in my country very surprised by an election result. Wow, I didn't expect that. That's the moment where see, think, wonder was very helpful for me at that time as a 46-year-old, 45-year-old. What do I see? What do I think's going on here? What does that make me wonder? I'm not trying to get political, but what I'm saying is see, think, wonder. It's not just an activity. It's a pattern. It's a model. It can come in handy for 10-year-olds. It can come in handy for mid-40-year-olds and everywhere in between. Right? You notice there was something about the modeling. You notice a lot of things about the language, the questions the teacher asked, where she listened. You heard the children say, something that connected, something that I see, something that I wonder. The children start to take on the language. Well, I mean, we know that about children. I mean, you all had babies at one point, or many of you, the parents did. You know, that baby didn't speak Portuguese when you had that baby at first, but did you have the experience when the baby was now 4 years old, and let's say you were stuck in traffic and you were late, and your voice came out of the 4-year-old's body? Anybody have that experience? Where you or your partner's voice came out of the child, and you think, oh, we have to be careful with our language now, right? Children learn what they live with. Children grow into the language that they hear. So that's why in schools we're always saying, what kinds of questions do the kids hear from us? What kind of language do they hear from us over and over again? Language will let the kids know this is important here. Or language will let the kids know, oh, the teachers say they want that, but they don't really. So language, you were noticing things about the environment of that classroom. You were noticing things about the expectations in that classroom. It wasn't just the expectations that they get the work done, but the expectation for them to become close observers. The expectation for them to bring curiosity to their learning. And all of those cultural forces were working together to shape the story of learning for Lisa's classroom. And the argument that I'll put out there is all of those things are working here at this school, sending a message to these kids. This is what's important here. And the tricky bit is for teachers and for all of us is when we say we want one thing and the culture says we want something else. I know a lot of teachers who will say, I really, really wish kids would just take a risk. We can learn from our mistakes. Actually, if you take a risk and you make a mistake, you can't get the top mark. Nobody says that with the mouth, but the culture could say that. So if we want them to take a risk, where is their time for them to take a risk? Where is their structure for them to take a risk? Where is their interactions to take a risk? If we want curiosity, I really want kids to be curious, but there's no time for curiosity, there's no routines for curiosity, there's no language of curiosity. The children soon know, oh, the teachers say they want us to be curious, but they don't really. And that's why in this project, this culture of thinking project, as this school gets started, and I would say this if the teachers weren't here, but don't listen, teachers. Parents, I actually think this school's pretty lucky. They got some good teachers. And there's a lot getting a new school in place. Because these teachers, from my impression, don't listen, because I don't want you guys to get too excited over there. But they're not just delivering lessons. Lots of teachers can deliver lessons. And I think on your campus in Salvador, it'd be the same thing, and your campus as well, Danielle. They're part of the other concept school campuses. The teachers aren't just delivering lessons, they're thinking about the culture. So that's more than the project, it's more than the activity. It's the language we use, the opportunities we create, the interactions we have, the modeling that we do. That's a lot to take in, but they're doing it in company with one another. So that's probably a lot to take in, but that's probably where I'll stop for now. So thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Priscilla, and then we can facilitate how we'll finish the end here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. This is such a pleasure to welcome you here today. Thank you for your time and your energy. And thank you parents and teachers for being here. It's such an honor and such a pleasure to share this moment with all of you. I think we have about 10 minutes or so for some questions. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask Mark at this time, we would be more than glad to facilitate a few questions.
Eu tenho uma, mas vai em português, eu vou explicar. Eu sou mãe dos mais velhos, 6º ano. E conversando com outras mães, a gente viu uma dificuldade deles de entenderem esse novo processo de ensino, de aprender. E aí fica a pergunta assim, para não perder essas crianças, no sentido assim, deles se desconectarem desse processo, o que eu posso falar em casa para eles? Ele tem um sentimento, ele me fala, mãe, eu não estou aprendendo nada. Eu vejo que não é isso.
Yeah, well, so this is a very new undertaking. The children come here and they know what you were saying, the year 6 child, right? Your student is, your child is 11, 10 years old. Okay, so they've been to school before. That's the power of culture. That culture they've been in has sent them messages. This is what learning is, right? And so how to? That's going to be the big question. I'll give some perspectives on it. That there's no answer to this. It's just perspectives. But I want to draw everyone's attention. This child's not very old, but already knows, oh, learning, messages about learning is, I'm supposed to learn it this way. Now these concept teachers are doing something else. Well, then that's not learning, because learning is supposed to be this. Right? And so it's important for us to know what we're doing here is there's a different kind of language being used. Not just English language, but just the language of pedagogy is different, right? The modeling is different, the routines are different. It's early days. You're worried about the student being distanced in checking out of school. But I think it's an ongoing patience. Well, what kinds of things are you studying? What's interesting about that? It's not learning like you did in others, but what do you think the teachers are wanting you to learn here? You know, you can have those kinds of conversations. Still, because right now, as a 10-year-old, I also would think, what are they doing to me, right? If you always operate on a particular script, and now I take that script from you and give you a new script, whoa, that's a lot of change. So right now, I think in early days, it's how do we be patient with that? One, because it's a new story for them, for some of them. I think two, for the parents and the teachers alone, always having, I mean, there's the communication of your journals and the weekly communications, but I think always having periods of time. Well, what were we thinking? What are we thinking now? What have we learned? I mean, there's going to be, and I think you might have to overdo that up front, teachers and parents too. Wait a minute, I know you're learning, so what were you thinking? What are you thinking now? What have you learned? Oh, you haven't learned anything? Nothing? Sometimes 10-year-olds say that anyway. What did I learn today? Nothing. You could also ask, rather than what did you learn today or what are you learning, you could say, what good questions did you ask today? That's another idea. It starts to send a message. Oh, it's not just what did you get today, what did you give today? What questions did you ask today? What did you want to find out more about? What perspectives did you seek today? It's not an easy answer, but you might say that. Oh, don't tell me what you learned today. What did you ask today? They might also say nothing. Okay, well then tomorrow, ask something. It's an idea. Yeah, it's not the best. I also have something else I want to say. I have on the sheet, there was we'll pass through this how can parents help? There is that one-page handout there. There are some ideas what other parents have done. I know that one's in English, but I think most people, reading is sometimes easier than following along live discussion. But I think one thing that parents do is develop a growth mindset. I think that's one thing. You've got this handout you can take away. But what we mean by that is, encourage risk-taking, encourage collaboration. If your child always in the other school, they were very quiet, they were afraid to make a mistake, okay, this is what we want you to learn here. That's why we want to send you to school. What risks will you take today? So encourage that. Enjoy the challenge. Okay, so this is a different kind of learning. So what questions can you ask? What risks could you take? Here's something. Focus on the process, not the attributes. What we mean by that is, you did a great job asking that question. That's different than just saying, what a clever girl you are. See, what a clever girl you are, that's not so helpful because I don't know what's clever, but it's really clever of you to ask such a question. Those questions are important. You see, that's a growth mindset. So it's not, some people are clever and other people are not so clever, but rather you start talking about the processes. Another thing on that sheet too, sorry, I just wanted to make sure they get this. Challenge the children, but don't rescue them. Always push the challenge, but don't rescue. And I say that to teachers too. I don't know in Portuguese if you have this, or in Brazil if you have this idea. Certainly in the United States, we have a phenomenon called helicopter parents. Do you know what a helicopter parent is? No. It's the parent who just keeps hovering and hovering and hovering, always saving the child. And so even when the child goes to university, the parent is still there. Really? Do you want to do that forever? Right? No, you don't want to do that forever. There's a time and place for that. And I think teachers, I'm sorry, but sometimes I see teachers do helicopter teaching. As soon as a child is starting to take a risk and it's not working out, let me fix that for you, right? And so it's a fine line for both teachers and so how do we challenge but don't rescue? So, develop this resilience. If I step in every time, then they don't become resilient or persistent, which is a big habit of mine. I know they're working on here. Try to keep the steering wheel in their hands as much as possible. Ask questions to help them think through the problem. Identify a plan. Choose a course of action. Don't give them the directions every time. But ask them questions to help them formulate their path. I mean, 2-year-olds are different than 11-year-olds, but still, I think this is one thing that parents do. One last thing, and then you have that sheet that has others. Name and notice thinking. When your child makes a connection, it's really important to say, that's interesting. Now, how are you connecting that with what you saw? You really noticed something today, or, that's another perspective. Notice and name thinking. That's an interesting theory you have, Alexa. Tell me more. That's another way that parents start to highlight it's thinking that we want them to do, not just compliance. You could say things like, so how do you see these things connected? Now that's a perspective I haven't thought about. Tell me more. Or this one, many of the teachers are finding some good fuel with this question. Parents, you could ask this, what makes you say that? That's what that teacher in the video was saying an awful lot of. You think they might be being forced to work. What makes you say that? Anytime we say what makes you say that, we're sending a message. We're interested in what's inside your head. As a parent, I don't want to just tell you everything. I want to hear what you can tell me. It's hard because you're also fixing dinner and getting them to bed and everything else. And plus all the lessons they take and so on and so forth. But if you can sometimes get yourself to say, what makes you say that? What makes you say that? But don't ask it if you don't want to know what makes them say that. Only ask if you really want to know what makes you say that. Maybe there's another question or two?
have. Me ajuda, Brigitte.
Tá bom, pode deixar.
Why don't you say it here and then she can whisper in my ear.
Ok. Eu vou voltar um pouquinho atrás, né, para a gente pensar nessa coisa que foi colocada, que a gente precisa dar um tempo, eles precisam ter um tempo para pensar, o que falar, o que fazer, como se colocar, respeitar os colegas, né? E aí a gente viu no vídeo que na aula ali houve toda uma rotina, uma preparação, uma estrutura para que isso aconteça. Assim como a gente vê que acontece aqui na Ponce, né? Mas aí eu fiquei me perguntando, como é que a gente faz lá fora, né? Em que eles estão a todo tempo ali ligados no videogame, no jogo, que é algo bastante individual e que precisa de uma ação rápida, pensar rápido e já agir. Então, eu fiquei pensando um pouquinho nisso, né? Aí a gente pensar em mudança aí, mindset. Mas é isso que eu fiquei me perguntando um pouco.
That's a good one. Thank you. That's an interesting thing, especially when everything is so quick. Is that what you're saying? If I heard correctly, but even when they're playing that video game, let's say, and they have to do everything so quick, in many ways, I mean, if you've ever watched a child play one of those video games, what do I see? What do I think's going on here? Okay, what does that make me do, right? They're kind of doing see, think, wonder immediately if they want to go to the next screen or the next level. So in many ways, they are seeing, thinking, and wondering if they want to be successful or figure out how to win or something like that. I think there's a bigger question here about speed, though. When everything seems so, kids want to think so quick, and then here we are at school slowing things down, or parents were slowing things down. There could be some tension there. Is that the center of gravity of the question? Or?
Could be. É mais no sentido de tudo acontece tão rápido na vida deles e agora a gente tenta às vezes desacelerar esse processo e como a gente chega num balanço, é mais ou menos essa a essência da pergunta.
Então, a essência é porque assim, aqui a gente está mostrando para ele que ele precisa parar um pouco, né, pensar um pouco antes de responder, trabalhar de maneira colaborativa, respeitar o colega. E aí quando ele sai daqui, por mais que nós, né, que nós pais tenhamos ou tentamos pelo menos continuar com essa cultura da escola, mas eles estão expostos a essa coisa da rapidez realmente, né? E aí eu não sei como é que isso fica na cabeça deles, né?
Well, how does the child manage it? That's I don't have an easy answer to that, but it strikes me too of, you can also think about these years right now. This is where you learn to grow these habits that they can keep walking with. For example, those children there, okay, that looks like it takes some time to see, think, wonder. The children in that video we just watched, they are all 25 years old now. They're old kids now, because that video was made 15 years ago, or 24 years old, so they're 14 years later. Our greatest hope for them was see, think, wonder. Okay, that was such a long thing for that grade 5. That was so slow and meticulous. But those kids, when they were in university just a few years ago, our greatest hope for them was even in the university, when they've got all this reading to do and too little time to do it, and the professor expects it and the examinations are high, these kids have a good habit. Okay, here's the reading. What do I see? What do I think's going on here? What questions does this raise? Because it's automatic now. It's routine. It's something they can take. So right now it could feel slow. It could feel very measured. But this is the moment where that tool or structure grows into a habit. Because there are going to be moments where they need to respond in the moment and need to see, think, wonder now. And see, think, wonder isn't the only thinking. Okay, we're just using that example. But what about this country's response to the strike? last week. Was it last week or the week before? Forgive me for stepping into your country's issues. Mine's plenty. My country has plenty of issues, so I don't want to stick my nose. But like, that's not a quick, easy answer, right? That's the moment where seeing, thinking, wondering, for example, okay, so we might be able to stop this strike now, but it's not just that strike. There's a bigger problem here. There's bigger issues. And so what do we see beyond these workers don't want to deliver the goods? There's something more there. Again, forgive me for speaking out of turn. I don't know enough about the situation. But do you see, many of the problems our children will face when they're our age, some of the problems need a response to immediately. But some of the problems, especially the bigger ones, or the unknown, will take that tenacity, will take that persistence. Therefore, don't worry so much about the slow right now. Think about it as investment. Anytime we make investments, sometimes my investment doesn't grow very quickly. But the longer we invest, and the longer it lingers, it starts to pay some dividends. So that's our hope too. Yeah, it's our hope. Yeah, please. And then we need to wrap up. Yeah, please, one last question.
No, you just kind of asked my question that you said that these kids are about 25 years old now. So I was wondering if you have other examples of older kids that are in college or even in the work environment. Yeah, and are they, you know, how are they doing?
Yeah. Well, that you know, research is done whatever kind of research gets funded. So we can't just do it by goodwill. But we do work, most of the schools we work with are preschools through high schools. So while we're working with these ideas, and I showed an example from the primary school, we've got so many examples in the high school. And in the high schools, like I work in Australia, in Scotland, the United States, the high schools, the children are sitting for university exams and things. And so the pressures are really high. But even there, if the kids have a certain type of thinking that's just routine, it's automatic, then they start to bring that to the exam, even if the exam doesn't ask it. And so we start to see the responses more sophisticated. We start to see that the questions they ask to be a little more innovative or unique. And so there's some power. That's why I think it's exciting at this school. As you grow, as they get older, like right now, See, Think, Wonder, or Connections, it's at this level, but think where that can go over time. Because already they're thinking about slavery or love and religion. They're asking these big questions already when they're young. Think what they can do if they have some thinking habits in place. So that's our hope. So we'll keep working on that. At that, I think we probably come to an end, yeah?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
I'll stay around if people want.
Yes, thank you again, Mark. I actually, just to go back to your question, before my experience here at Concept, my experience was actually co-leading a high school. And it was a pretty big high school in South Florida, in a prominent school as well, college preparatory school. So we had 1,000 students in our high school. We sent about 250 students every year to big and small universities all around the world. And we started a culture of thinking there a few years ago in our high school, about 3 years ago. And what we've done is we tracked some of the students after they left our high school. What did they think about their experiences in terms of how we taught them and what they learned and how they applied those thinking routines to their learning environment in high school? And one of the things that the students said is exactly what Mark was saying right now, is students have come back, came back to us and shared that when they were taught how to routinize this thinking process, they were then able to extract meaning, make connections, extend their thinking a lot easier because they knew how to approach a problem or to approach a text or to approach an exam, because they could connect, extend, challenge. They could see, think, wonder. They could think, puzzle, explore. So they were using all of these thinking routines to get to the essence of what they wanted to, what they needed to learn. So it was really fascinating to hear from students in terms of what were the thinking dispositions and thinking moves that they had developed throughout the process of learning and throughout their learning journey in high school. We could talk more about it too. I would love to. And if anyone else has any questions, we can definitely do that. But for now, we would like to close this evening. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being with us. And we hope to see you in our next parent educational learning community. Our next one will be hosted in August. So July, we will be off on vacation, and you guys will be off with your families enjoying vacation. And in August, we'll come back and we will join for another interesting conversation. And Mark will be back with us sometime in October. He'll be back visiting with us as well. So we can take advantage of that opportunity and invite you guys for another chat. So thank you so much. Have a great evening and a great week, end of the week. Thank you. Thank you.
Obrigada.